Hello and welcome back. In previous session, we created a component dialog of waterfall type and added a bunch of steps to the waterfall model to prompt user and gather information required to make a reservation. We also saw an example of how we can validate the values entered by the user by adding a number prompt validator. But we are still not able to run the dialog as we have not yet taken care of the conversation state, and our component dialog and overall bot do not have any storage to persist the conversation and dialog state. So our component dialog or our main dialog doesn't really know what to do when a new activity comes in, when a user sends in a message. Our dialog wouldn't know what to do, where to send that message and how to process it without adding a conversation state object or storing our conversation state. In this section, we are going to add a storage layer to our bot. We are going to use in-memory storage for testing purposes. Then we are going to add different state management objects like conversation state and user state, and then see how we can create different property accessors under conversation state like dialog state property accessor that we added in the last section while creating our make reservation dialog, and some other property accessors like ones to keep track of the current topic, and then others to track if current dialog has ended or not. Then we will use these property accessors created under different state management objects to route our incoming activity and run our business logic based on it. So before we start making modifications and updates to our code, let's just have a quick overview of how dialog states are stored and referred by our bot. So here we have a diagram which shows whenever a message activity lands on our bot from Azure Bot Service, the bot will check our storage layer for a already saved dialog state for that particular conversation. And then if a dialog state is present, it will send it back to bot and then process the message as per the content of dialog state which was saved from the previous step. In a similar fashion, if the dialog is let's say a waterfall dialog, there will be multiple steps in the dialog and the bot will keep on running different steps and then keep on saving the dialog state after each step so that the bot knows like on which step the dialog was when a new message activity comes in and then proceed from that particular step. So let's go ahead and start adding our storage and conversation state to our bot. So I have my index.js file open once again, and in the next step we are going to add storage layer to our bot. So memory storage class is provided by bot builder module. So let's go ahead and add the memory storage layer. And then we need to create a instance of memory storage class. So let's create an instance of storage equal to new storage, and that's it. We have a memory storage layer. So here we are using the in-memory data storage for testing purpose. You can use that for development, but it's not recommended to use in-memory storage for production use, since this type of storage is volatile and temporary and has a limitation of 32 KB of data. So in the next step we need to add conversation state and user state to our code. So we are just going to import conversation state and user state classes. So these classes are also provided by bot builder module. So we have added the classes. Let's create an instance of both the classes. So I'm just gonna create it conversation state and then we are going to pass the memory object we just created. And similarly we are going to create a user state object and pass the memory storage object. So as I said earlier, these two are abstractions layer provided by the SDK. So we don't really have to dig too deep into how conversation state and user state saves the conversation or dialog state data in the storage. So this is taken care by the classes by itself. So now we have the conversation state and user state objects, but we need to pass these objects to our main dialog so that our main dialog is also aware of the conversation state. So we're just going to pass the instances we just created in the RRBot constructor. So whenever the RRBot instance is created, we are also passing the state management objects to it, and our RRBot is aware of the bot conversation state and user states. So that's all we need to do in the index.js file. In the next step, we need to update our main dialog, which is RRBot, and modify the constructor for the changes we have just done, and add the state management objects to the constructor. So I'm on my rrbot.js file and I have to update the constructor. Now we need to add the global object for these conversation state and user state objects. So I'm gonna just copy and similarly for user state. Let's save the code. So we have defined our state objects. The next step, we need to create property accessors for conversation and user state. So each state property accessor allows you to set or get the value of associated state property. We use each accessor to load the associated property from storage and then retrieve its current state from cache. Now these properties are always in key value pair. Right now we don't have any use case for creating any accessor for user state, but from our make reservation dialog we know that we need to pass a dialog state accessor when we will initiate this waterfall dialog. So let's go ahead and create a dialog state property accessor. So dialog state property accessor is created under conversation state object. So I'm going to create a dialog state property accessor, and property can be created using conversation states create property method. Create property, and then we need to pass string ID. I'll keep it same as dialog state, and that's it. So we will pass this dialog state property we just created when we will call the run method of make reservation component dialog. Now we have added a lot of different components to our bot. We have a component dialog which can make a reservation for a user. Then we have initialized our storage, we have initialized our conversation state management objects, and we have a dialog state property accessor that can manage the status of a particular dialog. What we haven't done yet and we need to code in the next step is to create some kind of logic that will route the incoming messages, incoming activities to one of the underlying component dialogs. So right now we have just one component dialog. Later on we'll create another component dialog to cancel the reservation, but we need some kind of routing and state management which can take care of routing incoming messages to the right underlying component dialog. So this logic goes inside the on message listener of activity handler. So till now we have nothing here. Now we'll start adding the routing logic and see how we can manage the incoming messages properly. So I'm just gonna add a method. I'm not gonna clutter the on message listener block. I'm just gonna create another method and push everything, all the incoming activities with context to this method for routing. I'm gonna call it dispatch to intent async method and then pass the context created for the current incoming activity, and that's it. Let's scroll down and then start defining our routing logic. So let's define our function first, dispatch, and we're going to receive the context. There could be different ways in which we can manage and route our incoming activities, but typically most of them, or I would say rather all of them, includes creation of few property accessors under state management objects. These accessors can be something like tracking the current topic and previous topic which was served by the bot, or tracking if the current waterfall dialog is going on or it has ended, and based on few if else cases and switch cases and based on our design pattern we can route the incoming messages properly. So I'm going to take a similar example on how we can handle an incoming activity message activity to the bot and route it properly based on the values that are currently stored in our property accessors. So right now we know that we have a component dialog called make reservation dialog, and we have a welcome dialog that is presented to user when the user joins the conversation. We're going to take up this example and we're going to present the user with a welcome message, and if the user selects make reservation as the option, then we want the user to be directed to uh, make reservation waterfall dialog, and until that waterfall dialog has ended we want the user's subsequent incoming messages to be directed to make reservation dialog, and if the dialog has ended we want to present the user with the welcome message once again, and again if the user selects make reservation as the option then we need the user to be directed to make reservation waterfall dialog once again, and the loop goes on and on. So let's try to build this and see what all property accessors we need to create to achieve this objective. So once again we are back at our Visual Studio Code and we have defined a dispatch to intent async function. So inside this function we are going to define our logic to handle incoming activities. So first of all let's try to start our bot and see what is happening if the user selects make reservation option in welcome message. So I'll open the terminal and to start my bot. So a bot is running. Let's go to bot emulator and see what's going on there. So I'm going to open my already saved RR-bot configuration, and here you can see that we are still getting the welcome message, and once I click the make reservation option, and there you can see the message was sent but we did not get any reply back from the bot because we haven't defined anything in an on message listener that what the bot should do with our incoming message. So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and start defining our on message listeners content. So here we have the incoming message inside the context.activity.text variable. So first of all we want to redirect make reservation incoming message to make reservation dialog. So let's put a switch case which will check for context.activity.text content. Let's open the switch case and let's put a case which will check if this value matches make reservation text. We will also have a default case, and inside default case we are just going to put a simple message that incoming message did not match make reservation. So our default case is ready. Next we want to direct the incoming message to make reservation dialog under make reservation case. So before we can do that, let's go at the top of the code, and we need to define a global object of make reservation dialog here. Make and then we need to pass the conversation state and user state that we just defined here to the constructor of make reservation dialog bot. So let's go to make reservation dialog and edit the constructor. I'm just gonna add conversation dialog. We are doing this so that our component dialog is also aware of the current conversation state and user state. And that's it. Let's go back to our RR bot. So we have a global object defined here for make reservation dialog. Let's go back to our make reservation case, and when the user types in make reservation, we are going to call the run method of make reservation dialog. And then we need to pass the context and dialog state accessor that we created earlier to the run method, and that's it. Let's set the break to both the cases, and let's go back to our terminal and see how our bot is behaving now. I'm gonna start the bot. So the syntax looks good and our bot is up. Let's go back to emulator and try to restart the conversation. So now we have the switch case ready, and once we click on make reservation, we get redirected to make reservation dialog. So this is the first step that we defined in our waterfall model in our make reservation dialog. But the problem here is if we choose yes, nothing happens. Now let's understand what happened here. So when the first time we send the make reservation text to bot, so our bot was able to match our make reservation incoming message with the first case in our switch block, and we were redirected to make reservation dialog here. But then we chose yes as the option, and in the second incoming activity this case was not met, and the switch case just printed out the console.log where we mentioned did not match the make reservation case. So how do we make this second activity to be redirected to second step of make reservation dialog and not to some other case? To handle this case properly, we need to define some more property accessors under conversation state, and then see how we can use those accessors to be able to manage the conversation flow properly. So let's go at the top inside our constructor, and let's define two more property accessors. So the first property accessor that we need is to maintain that current topic or current intent, which will save the value of the current conversation dialog which is going on. So let's just define a property accessor and call it previous intent, and we'll create it under conversation state. And to create a property accessor, we know that we can use the create property method and then provide a string ID. I'm gonna name it the same as the accessor. And to save all the other conversation state related data, we are going to create one generic uh, property accessor called conversation data. And under this property accessor, we can create multiple different key value mapped properties which can save different kind of conversation state related data. So let's just create conversation data property accessor. Again, we are going to create it under conversation state and use create property method. I'm gonna name it conversation data. So let's go back to the bottom of our code. So inside our switch case, we need to check if inside our switch case, we need to check the values of the newly created property accessor. So we are first going to create the empty property accessors and then use getter and setter methods to set the values of these accessors and create a nice conversation flow logic for our make reservation case. So let's just define the constant previous intent. And we're going to use the globally created previous intent property accessor. So we know that we can use setter and getter methods to set property accessor values. So I'm gonna just fetch the default property accessor value for previous intent, and similarly we are going to fetch the conversation data property accessor value. So right now this is going to be empty because we haven't defined anything under these accessors. Conversation data dot get, and then again provide the context and fetch the values. Oh, I put it in under the switch case. This need to go outside the switch case inside the function. Just gonna copy paste it there. So we are going to need another variable called current intent. So we have the previous intent saved inside the accessor. We need to set the current intent as well. So if you remember the conversation flow dialog that we defined earlier, we need to check if the dialog has ended in the waterfall model, and we also need to check what's the current topic, and based on that we need to send the incoming activity to make reservation dialog, or we need to give a user with welcome message again. So let's go ahead and define this part of the conversation flow. So I'm gonna just use few if else cases to define our conversation flow. So let's put a if case and see what is the value of previous intent. So I'm gonna create a key value pair inside the property accessor. Let's just name it intent name. So this will be empty by default. Later on we'll see how we can set the values of these key value pairs. And we will just check if there is any value set for intent name. And we're also going to check the status of our dialog. So again, under conversation data, I'm going to create a key value object called end dialog and check if the value of this is equal to true. And then I'm going to put another else if. Let's just put the first one as false. We'll just copy it. And inside the else if, we are going to check if the end dialog value is true. Don't worry, we're gonna go through all these cases and values in a while. And then we are going to put a else case. Let's save the code. So under our if statement, we are checking if we have already set a topic or an intent, and previous intent or intent name has some value. And then we are checking if that particular topic that was running has ended or not, that particular dialog has ended or not. And in this case we are checking if it has not ended. So if previous topic is already running, previous dialog is already running, then we want to set the value of current intent as the previously running intent. In the else if, we are checking if previously there was a topic already running, and if the dialog has ended. So whatever was running, whatever waterfall dialog or dialog was earlier running, so that dialog has ended. So if these two cases, if these two criteria matches, then we want to send our current intent value as the message we have just received. So we can use this to initiate a new dialog because previous dialog has ended. So we are going to set it as context.activity.text. And for all the other cases, we know that there was no running topic. We have not yet saved any topic. Then in that case, we can set the value of current intent as the topic we have just received. And then we are going to set the value of previous intent.intent name as the currently received activity or the text message. So we can run the setter method of property accessor. So we're gonna save it into previous intents. So we can call the set method of the property accessor and then send the context. And then set intent names value as the context activity text. And that's all. So let's say the first time user chooses make reservation case under suggested action welcome message, then we are setting the current intent as this topic, and then we are also setting the previous intent name value as make reservation. So our if else cases are ready. Now let's go to our switch case, and then we need to check for the current intent. So under our make reservation case, whenever the current intent value matches with make reservation, first of all let's just do a console log output so that we know that this case has matched. And then we are going to run the make reservation dialog as we did before. But before running this dialog, we want to set the value of end dialog as false. So we're going to call the setter method of end dialog property accessor and set it to false. I'm going to pass the context and then set the value of end dialog as false because we are going to start a dialog in the next step. So how do we know that our dialog has ended? So here we are running the make reservation dialog, and the call will go to make reservation dialog, and then the waterfall dialog is going to run each step one by one, and in the end we are ending the dialog. But how do we pass this value to our RRBot or the main dialog? So for that we can define another function which will return that the dialog has ended, and our RRBot the main dialog bot is also aware of the dialog state. So let's go ahead and define a variable called endDialog and set it to empty string. Now in the first step, I'm going to set the value of endDialog to false. So this is a local variable for this class. Don't get confused with the property accessor endDialog and this value. This is just a local value that we have set here for this particular waterfall dialog. And in the end, just before ending the dialog, I'm going to set this value to true. So if our waterfall dialog has completed and all the steps have run, in the end we are setting the value of true, otherwise the value will stay false. But to return this value to our RR bot, let's define another function, and we are going to call this function as is dialog complete. Let's define this function. This will be a async function, is dialog complete, and this will just simply return the value of endDialog. So this will just be a true or false value. There is a spelling mistake there. I'm just gonna fix it, and that's all. Now let's go back to our RR bot, and after we are running the make reservation dialog, we are again going to save the value of endDialog. By calling the new method we just created. Make reservation dialog dot is dialog complete, and that's it. So let's have a quick look at our code. Oh, just made a mistake there. This needs to be this dot conversation data, and again this needs to be this dot previous intent. So previous intent is our property accessor. So the one last thing that we need to add is to save our conversation state and user state every time a dialog is being loaded. So after each step of waterfall dialog, we need to save the conversation state, which will in turn save the dialog state because it's a property accessor under conversation state. So we are going to add a listener called onDialog, which is called every time a new dialog is initiated. So let's just add that listener in our main dialog. So onDialog listener again takes in the context, the current context for this particular activity, and we are saving any state changes that happen during the execution of the dialog. So in this listener we are just saving the conversation state by calling save changes method of conversation state and user state, and then we are just passing the context here, and then we are calling next method, which ensures that the next bot handler is run. So everything looks fine. Let's go to our terminal and start the bot, and then we'll test it in emulator. That's it, our bot is up. Let's go to emulator and then open the RR bot configuration. So we have the welcome message. Let's hit on make reservation. So we have successfully entered the first use case for make reservation. So if we type yes this time, we should be sent to second step of make reservation because we are saving the conversation state and we have the dispatcher logic, the router logic in place. So let's click on yes, and there you go. So we are on the second step. The bot was successfully able to preserve the dialog state, and the bot knew that the first step is completed, and uh, it sent us to second step of the waterfall dialog. So let's put the so let's go ahead and give a random name. uh, let's say George, and we are on the third step, so everything looks good. I'm just going to put 12. So bot builder has this inbuilt ability uh, to be able to identify the correct date formats. So it can identify multiple different date formats. So let's go ahead and put a random date. And so I'm putting in a year, month, and uh, date format. Let's press enter, and let's just put 9 p.m. So again, for time, the bot is able to identify different time formats. So I can put 9 p.m. or 9.00 in hours, or I can put am in the end, and the bot should be able to identify if one of the format of time matches. Let's press enter. So this is the step where we were uh, just giving out a summary of all the inputs that user has provided. So we can see that the name and participant values were correctly displayed. So date and time are object format, so we need to stringify the JSON object. So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and go to make reservation dialog and just fix it quickly. So our name value is getting displayed properly, participants value is getting displayed properly. So here we need to just pass the JSON object into a string, and same for time. Stringify, and that's it. Let's restart our bot. Let's go back to emulator and try to restart the conversation. Let's click on make reservation, click on yes, put a random name, gonna put 5 this time, and then I'm gonna put a date 13th January 2020, and then I'm just gonna put 10 a.m. as time. And this time you can see that bot builder library was able to identify that it's a date value and was able to successfully save it in the memory. And for time, it's able to identify that it's 10 a.m. and type is type. Here you can see the type is date. So it has some great inbuilt intelligence that's really helpful while building our bots. So the next step, we want to just provide a confirmation if you want to go ahead and make the reservation with these values. I'm just going to type yes, and our reservation is successfully made, and you have a reservation ID. So in the next step, we want to present the user with a welcome message once the dialog has completed. So once we have received the reservation ID, our make reservation waterfall dialog is complete, and then this is like a random end to our conversation. So it would be nice if we can present the user with again with the suggested actions, maybe the welcome dialog. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and make some modification to add little more user friendliness to our bot. Let's clear the screen. I'm gonna minimize the terminal a little bit. So let's go back to our RR bot. Let's go to our dispatcher. So in our switch case, I want to present the user with a welcome message once my make reservation dialog is complete. So I'll just put a if case here and check if value of end dialog under conversation data property accessor is true. So whenever we get the end dialog value as true, that means our make reservation dialog has ended, and we want to present the user with suggested actions once again. So I'm just gonna copy the send suggested actions method and then call this method from under this if statement. And here we need to change the context to context because we are passing the context here everywhere. And that's it. Let's go back to our terminal and start our bot. And restart the conversation. So let's click on make reservation and quickly fill in all the values. Would you like to make reservation? Yes. I'm gonna put Rahul this time. Number of participants, I'm gonna put 50. This time I'm gonna give a different date format. Let's say 15th January 2020, and I'm gonna put 9 p.m. as time. I'm gonna type yes, and this time we got a message that reservation is successfully made. We got the reservation ID, and then we were also presented with the suggested actions dialog. So if we again choose to make a new reservation, this will initiate a new waterfall dialog. And other name, I can put some other name this time. Let's put some random name. Put 2. I'm gonna just put 7/7/2019. I'm gonna put 10 a.m. in different format. And then if I click on yes, this will make the reservation again, and again we are presented with a new suggested action dialog. So in this way we are successfully able to preserve our conversation state and our dialog state, and then we are successfully able to dispatch the incoming messages to one of the components that we have created, make reservation, without any difficulty, and our bot works perfectly fine. So from here on we can develop our bot and add more component dialogues like cancel reservation. We are going to do that next. So that's all for this lecture, and I will see you in next session where we are going to add another component dialog called cancel reservation, and then see how we can route the conversation properly when we have multiple dialogues in place.